When somebody walks into 40k for the first time, is that how they feel? When someone walks into Kings of War for the first time, is that how they feel? When somebody picks up an Infinity box off the shelf, is that how they feel? It got me thinking about how accessible actually are war games for complete beginners. Could we do more to kind of make our hobby more approachable for beginners? The main topic I want to chat about tonight is around the fact that recently I have kind of started to get the urge to dip my toe into some World War II gaming. And I've been looking at the different systems and kind of deciding, well, you know, is there a particular game that I'm interested in? Is there particular model ranges that I'm interested in? And what I would say is I'm finding it very confusing. And let me explain what I'm finding confusing. So I put a post on Twitter and I kind of say I don't see a lot of sort of bolt action stuff in my Twitter feed. Tell me who the kind of who's the accounts that I should be following, because I see very little historical stuff in my Twitter feed. And my Twitter feed's quite well curated. I see lots of nice painted minis and people playing games, but I don't ever see any historical stuff. So I wanted to find out who were the people I should be following and kind of talking to. And I had a really good response, but a lot of the things that people kind of like fired at me were things like, well, I don't play bolt action. I prefer chain of command. Is it only kind of those models you want to see? And what I said kind of was that I'm just looking for inspiration. I just want to see some kind of World War II table layout and nicely painted minis and that kind of stuff. So then somebody else threw in like, oh, if you're looking at like bolt action, you're looking at the wrong scale. You should be doing 12 mil or you should be doing 6 mil. And then somebody else said to me, well, don't forget there's loads of other companies out there as well. Like loads of other companies make World War II miniatures. There's not just Warlord. And I got the impression that there's a bit of an not anti-Warlord vibe, shall I say. It's almost like kind of Warlord or the GW of historical gaming. And as soon as you kind of say, oh, I'm looking at this, people try to point you in other directions. So that was one thing that kind of like was like, hang on, I'm coming at this with zero knowledge. I'm coming at this with no experience of historical gaming. And I'm trying to dip my toe in and I'm basically being sent off in 25 different directions. So that was part of it that was confusing. The other part of it that was a bit confusing is the fact is that when you do kind of, if you decide there is a certain game you want to play, let's say bolt action for argument's sake, because I like the way Warlord has their ranges much more easily kind of to be able to kind of see like what's what, if you like. And I like the fact that bolt action isn't as historically accurate. It feels a little bit more kind of World War II 40k, if you like. It's a bit more of a game than a historical simulation. But what is a little bit confusing is, like, if I was to pick up, let's use 40k as an example. If I want to play 40k and I think, oh, I want to play Space Marines, I just buy some Space Marine models and I can kind of get started building my army. The confusing thing when it comes to historical games is there are a lot of different time periods, even within like kind of World War II, shall we say. So there's kind of like early war, there's mid-war, and there's late war. And armies like the British Army or like the American Army or the Germans had different troops, had different equipment, had different vehicles, different tanks across the kind of time period of the war. And because of this, it becomes confusing as to, well, what do I actually buy? There doesn't seem to be an easy route in, I'm playing in this time period or whatever, if that makes sense. Now, I know people will say, well, you just buy one of the starter sets and then you can kind of grow from there. But the starter sets are usually kind of, I think the Band of Brothers starter set, for example, is Americans and Germans. I think there's another starter set called Island Warfare. There's another starter set called Gentleman's War. I think the Gentleman's War is kind of set in the African deserts, like the desert warfare type things, and has, I think it's like the 8th Infantry. This is all stuff I'm learning just from over the last couple of days against the Germans. So I think it depends upon kind of, you need to kind of almost have in mind which nation army you kind of want to start with and go from there. But then that's the point. I mean, like, so for example, see, I decide to ignore the starter boxes and I decide to go with the Russian army, where like there's lots of different parts to it. For example, obviously the Russians, there's like the winter stuff from Stalingrad and stuff. There's all sorts of different formats to it. And it's not obvious, and I've looked on their websites and I've kind of like flicked through information, and it's not really obvious as to whether like things fit together within these armies. Now, from what I understand, and I think this is right, bolt action isn't really played in a specific time period. And this is one of the reasons people don't class it as a very historically accurate game, was because there's nothing wrong. You can take an early war army and you can use late war tanks and you can fight against an army that's from the mid-war. It really is a game as such, and it's not necessarily historically accurate. And as far as I understand, there are theatre books which basically you can then almost limit your forces to a certain time period and try and make them more historically accurate. But the problem comes is that if you're going to play the game and you don't know who you're going to be playing against, maybe you're going to play at a store, maybe you're going to play at an event or a tournament, do people play historically accurate? Do people just play what you want? That it all becomes quite confusing. And so actually, and it becomes even more confusing as you then spread out across all of the different World War II rule sets that everybody was kind of throwing at me, like, what about this, what about this, what about this, what about this? It just become a little bit of like a kind of like a wall of information with no real easy way in. Now, this got me thinking, this whole kind of confusing thing, and where tonight's topic and title come from is like, it's been a long time since I've been new to wargaming, and me trying to kind of approach World War II wargaming feels like, my God, this is just like this is very confusing without the historical knowledge, without the kind of understanding of the different times, like the timelines in the war, and which is this tank? Can I use this tank with these soldiers? And can these soldiers fight with these soldiers even though they fought in different places, and all that kind of stuff? Is that how beginners feel when they walk into like sort of fantasy and sci-fi war games? When somebody walks into 40k for the first time, is that how they feel? When someone walks into Kings of War for the first time, is that how they feel? When somebody picks up an Infinity box off the shelf, is that how they feel? Because it got me thinking about how accessible actually are war games for complete beginners. Because Games Workshop have worked really hard, to be fair, to try and create. They've obviously got their stores where they have their beginner intro games. They have their paint ranges designed by, like sort of shade and layers and highlights and dry paints for dry brushing and air paints for air brushes. Their brushes are all designed with kind of like small detail and big tank brush and all this kind of stuff. They've done a really good job of trying to beginner friendly their system. Now, I'm not saying that the rules for their games are necessarily beginner friendly, but they have very easy sort of start collecting boxes. If you like orcs and you buy anything for 40k orcs, you can play that in your army generally. But other companies I'm not so sure about. You take Mantic as an example. You all know that I play a lot of Mantic stuff. The biggest thing that's missing from their games is instructions. They don't tell you how to put things together. They don't tell you what the different weapons are called, and it can be quite frustrating. Like Infinity, for example, they do their starter boxes for Code 1. They do their beyond their starter boxes, a little bit like the video I did the other night on the Dystopian Wars stuff, which is kind of like an easy maybe route in, but like some of the names of their units are almost unpronounceable a little bit, and even that can become quite confusing. A lot of their models look relatively similar, and it's not that easy to see what things are on the tabletop. And it just got me thinking, really, like, because it's been such a long time, like I say, since I was a beginner to tabletop gaming, is how I feel about historical gaming, is that how our hobby is? Could we do more to kind of make our hobby more approachable for beginners? Young people coming in, we're really relying upon people like us who are watching this video and kind of maybe chatting in the chat tonight. We're relying upon people like us to demo games to people. We're relying upon people like us to take somebody by the hand and tell them how to do it. We're relying upon people like me to make videos, like beginner-friendly videos of this is how you play this game, or like what's the easiest route in, or what should you buy next after you've bought your starter box. Like, these companies are relying a lot upon the communities and upon the kind of sort of people who like making videos and podcasts to almost bridge that gap between I'm interested and getting started. Like, for example, I don't play Magic the Gathering, but Magic the Gathering seems absolutely baffling to me as an outsider about all the different types of things. Like, I keep hearing about like commander decks, and I hear about these secret lair releases, and I hear about these foil cards, and when I see people chatting about it online, it's like a foreign language to me. It doesn't make any sense. And I do wonder if that is how kind of miniature gaming is seen to an outsider, and is it one of the barriers to getting people in? Like, people who play video games, it's such an easy stepping in point. Like, video games don't come with instruction books anymore now, because they've learned that basically the easiest way to get you to learn how to play a game is basically just to throw you in at the start and kind of like take you through a tutorial level where they go, right, press A button to jump here and that kind of stuff. Like, we don't necessarily have that very much when it comes to miniature gaming. Like, I looked at some, I think it was the instructions that came with the Band of Brothers box set, and it basically gives you an idea of how to build stuff. Like, it says, like, build these ones with, I don't know if this is the right term, but like, let's say build these ones with a Browning rifle. But then it doesn't tell you on the sprue what a Browning rifle is. So you then have to start like Googling what does a Browning rifle look like and trying to kind of understand which rifle that is on the sprue. I just find that there's a bigger barrier, I think, than I first thought. And I wonder if there is something we can do as an industry, and I include myself in the tabletop industry in what I do. Is there something we can do that makes wargaming of all different sort of sizes and flavors? Is there something we can do that makes it more accessible? I'd love to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments. Let me know in the chat if you're doing this live now, and I'd love to have a chat with you about it.